You know, there is something rather curious about the way human beings relate to one another. We imagine, quite romantically, that companionship is always a matter of harmony, of shared paths, of two beings strolling side by side towards some common horizon. But it isn't so simple. For the moment you begin to wake up, the moment you begin to sense the magnificent, terrifying, liberating fact that your life is your own, something subtle changes in the atmosphere of your relationships. It's as though you've stepped out of a crowded room into fresh air and only then notice how heavy the room had been, and you see not everyone likes fresh air. The topic before us, those who fear your freedom cannot walk beside you, is not a condemnation. I am not interested in creating villains out of ordinary people. Rather, it is an observation of a kind of natural law, like noticing how some creatures thrive in the daylight while others prefer the shelter of night. There are those who cling to control, to certainty, to the familiar architecture of who they think you should be. And as long as you remain within that architecture, as long as you play the part assigned to you, everything appears perfectly cordial. But the moment you slip out of the costume, oh, then the trouble begins. You see, most people don't actually fear your freedom. They fear what your freedom reveals about themselves. Because when someone close to you starts living in a way that is spontaneous, alive, unbound by the usual anxieties, it becomes painfully clear how tightly they have bound themselves. When you stop apologizing for your own existence, when you begin to feel at home in your own skin, they sense a kind of silent invitation. You too could live this way. But that is a frightening invitation for someone who believes life must be tightly gripped, managed, and restrained. So this fear shows up in very subtle ways. Perhaps you've noticed it. Someone becomes uncomfortable when you change, not dramatically, but even slightly. They might say, "You've become different," as though that were a sin. They want you to stay predictable, even if predictable means miserable. For if you change, they must change their relationship to you. They can no longer count on the old dance one leads, one follows, one pleases, one approves, one shines, the other hides. And when the rhythm shifts, they feel as though the ground beneath their feet is trembling. It's rather like watching a bird that has lived too long in a cage approach the open door. The sky terrifies it. The vastness terrifies it. The responsibility terrifies it, and if you, another bird, suddenly spread your wings and take flight, the caged one may shout after you, "Come back. This is reckless. This is unsafe." But the truth is not that the sky is dangerous. It's that they have forgotten how to fly, and so these people cannot walk beside you. Not because they are unworthy, not because you are superior, but simply because your direction is incompatible with their fear. Now, awakening is not some grandiose, mystical event. It is, in fact, extraordinarily simple. It's the recognition that you are not obligated to be the person others have imagined. It's the quiet understanding that your life is not a performance staged for an audience. And once you touch even the edge of this understanding, a softness enters your life, a kind of ease. You begin to act naturally, without pretense. You stop editing yourself. You stop negotiating your own authenticity in exchange for approval. But the world in which most human beings live, the world of endless roles, expectations, comparisons, and anxieties, does not always take kindly to such ease. And so this script, this meditation, is not about avoiding people in a moral sense. It is about recognizing the rhythms of your own freedom and noticing when those around you are unwilling to move with that rhythm. It is about learning to walk your path without shrinking to fit the fears of others. Let me give you an image. Imagine you are walking through a dense forest. For years, you've walked along a clearly marked trail, safe, predictable, trodden by thousands before you. Then one day, you find an opening between the trees that leads somewhere unknown. The air is different there, lighter, The light falls in a peculiar, enchanting way. Something in you whispers, "This is where you must go." But those who have walked with you might say, "No, no, stay on the trail. We know this way. We've come too far to turn now." And they may even refuse to accompany you if you step off that path. But here is the exquisite truth. If you do not follow the path that calls to you, you will betray yourself, and nothing, not loyalty, not politeness, not fear of being alone, is worth such a betrayal. The people who fear your freedom will often speak as though they are protecting you. They will wrap their fear in the language of care. "I'm worried about you. I just want what's best. This isn't who you are." But if you listen closely, you'll hear what they truly mean. "This isn't who I need you to be for me to remain comfortable." But life, you see, is not constructed for comfort. It is constructed for transformation. And transformation is a lonely business, not because others abandon you, but because you outgrow the places where they feel at home. Freedom has an odd way of expanding you beyond the boundaries of relationships that once seemed fixed, inevitable, permanent. Suddenly you no longer fit into the old puzzle, and the pieces that once surrounded you find your new shape perplexing. Now, when I say these people cannot walk beside you, it does not mean you must cast them out with dramatic finality. Sometimes distance grows gently, like the soft widening of a river between two drifting boats. You do not steer away, you simply stop rowing toward. There is no bitterness in this, only clarity. And in that clarity something marvelous occurs. You discover companions who breathe the same kind of air you do, those who celebrate your freedom, not fear it, those who are inspired by your authenticity, not threatened by it, those who delight in the unfolding of your life, as though it were a flower blossoming in spring. But to meet them, you must first be willing to lose the ones who only loved the version of you that remained conveniently small. And we shall speak more about this, about the art of letting go, the quiet courage of walking alone, and the beauty of discovering those who meet you on the open road as we continue. And so let us wander a little deeper into this strange and delicate territory, this place where freedom meets relationship, where awakening meets the expectations of others, where you begin to sense the subtle but undeniable shift in the very texture of your life. You see, when a person begins to awaken, they do not suddenly rise into sainthood. There is no halo, no grand proclamation. Instead, there is a quiet softening, a loosening of the internal knots that once kept you tense, apologetic, and overly concerned with how you appeared in the eyes of others. And this softening, this subtle inward blossoming, is often perceived by those around you not as a blessing, but as a disturbance. Why? Because your freedom removes the mirror they used to rely upon. Most people, without realizing it, use one another as mirrors that reaffirm the stories they cling to, stories about who they are, what life must be, what is safe, what is possible, what is forbidden. And when you stop playing your part in that story, the mirror cracks. It no longer reflects the image they have grown accustomed to. It shows them a possibility they have spent years avoiding. Imagine two people dancing a choreography they both know by heart. If one suddenly changes the rhythm, what happens? The other stumbles, they become confused, maybe even irritated. It's not that the new rhythm is wrong, it merely reveals how attached the other had become to the familiar step. And instead of learning a new dance, many will insist that you return to the old one. But awakening is not a dance you can reverse. Once you have tasted the profound relief of being yourself, you cannot go back to shrinking in order to soothe someone else's discomfort. And so, these people, the ones who fear your freedom, often try to pull you back with subtle tools. Disapproval, misunderstanding, judgment, or the suggestion that you have become irresponsible, unrealistic, or self-centered. But consider for a moment who is truly more self-centered, the one who chooses to live honestly, or the one who asks another to lie to themselves in order to maintain the comfort of a narrative. There is something deeply liberating when you realize that you do not exist to complete anyone else's story. But liberation, as beautiful as it is, always comes with a price, the willingness to move without the familiar hand to hold. Let us not rush past this point, for it is one of the great paradoxes of spiritual growth. Freedom is exhilarating, it is also disorienting. To walk away from the expectations of others is to enter a kind of spaciousness that can feel both heavenly and terrifying. You are no longer hemmed in by the walls that once confined you, but neither are you guided by them, and in this spaciousness many people panic. They run back to the old walls, even if those walls once suffocated them. The known prison feels safer than the unknown sky. But if you stay with the openness long enough, something miraculous begins to unfold. Your senses sharpen. You begin to hear the quiet hum of your own intuition, that inner compass that was always there, unnoticed beneath the noise of trying to please others. And this intuition begins to guide your life with a kind of effortless intelligence, far more subtle and precise than any external approval could ever be. At this point, you no longer force relationships to continue simply because they once mattered. You no longer grip people out of fear that you may walk alone, for you start to see that walking alone is not loneliness, it is spaciousness, and only in that spaciousness can new, authentic companionship arise. Now let us return to the people who fear your freedom. It is important to understand that they are not villains, they are not enemies, they are frightened, often unconsciously so, like children who cling to a familiar toy, not because it is particularly special, but because its familiarity comforts them. They fear the unpredictability of your growth, because if you grow beyond their expectations, they must confront their own stagnation. And that is no easy task. So they cling, they tug. They attempt to confine you with the invisible ropes of guilt, nostalgia, or obligation. They want you to remain as you were because your transformation disrupts their sense of who they are. If you change, the entire landscape of the relationship must change, and this requires them to wake up as well, which many are simply not ready to do. There is a tenderness in recognizing this, a compassion. You begin to see that their resistance is not personal, it is existential. They do not fear losing you. They fear losing the part of themselves that only existed when you stayed small. This understanding makes it easier to let go. There is a moment in every awakening where you must make a choice. Will you diminish yourself to remain acceptable to those who fear change, or will you allow yourself to continue growing, even if it means some people no longer recognize you? And here is the beautiful, painful truth. You cannot do both. To grow and to remain familiar are, in fact, mutually exclusive states. You can either protect their illusion of you, or you can embody the truth of yourself. Most choose the illusion not out of malice, but because they don't yet trust the intelligence of life, the intelligence of their own being. They believe that if they stop controlling everything, including you, the world will collapse into chaos. But life is not chaos. Life is dance. Life is flow. Life is the continuous, effortless unfolding of intelligence far greater than the human mind can comprehend. And when you synchronize yourself with that flow, when you begin to live intuitively, spontaneously, authentically, you become like a river that refuses to be dammed. You move where life moves. You expand where life expands. You deepen where life deepens. People who fear your freedom try to build walls around this river, but they soon discover that living water cannot be confined. It will either overflow or find another path entirely. And this is why they cannot walk beside you, not because you reject them, but because they refuse to flow. In our next movement together, we shall explore a profound aspect of this transformation, how solitude becomes a sanctuary, how authenticity becomes a compass, and how life begins guiding you toward those rare companions who do not fear your freedom, but celebrate it. As we go on, let us look more closely at this curious phenomenon of solitude, not the loneliness that people try so desperately to avoid, but the spacious, fertile solitude that begins to bloom once you stop contorting yourself to fit the narrow expectations of those who fear your freedom. You see, when the old companions drift away, when the relationships built upon habit and mutual insecurity begin to dissolve, there is often a moment, perhaps even a long stretch, where you feel suspended in a kind of emptiness. The familiar voices are quieter, the reassuring patterns are gone, and for the first time in years you can actually hear the sound of your own mind without the echo of someone else's approval reverberating through it. This can feel unsettling, like stepping into a vast room with high ceilings and no furniture. But give it time. Watch what happens. Slowly, the emptiness becomes spaciousness. What felt like loss begins to feel like clarity. You realize that much of what you called connection was simply an exchange of anxieties, a trading of masks, a mutual agreement not to disturb each other's illusions. But in solitude, in true solitude, the masks fall away, because there is no one left to impress. The illusions dissolve because there is no audience left to perform for. And in this gentle unraveling, you begin to meet the person you have always been beneath the noise. You might discover that you are far quieter inside than you expected. Or far wilder, perhaps even both at once, like a deep forest, still on the surface, bursting with hidden life beneath. Solitude reveals you to yourself in a way no relationship ever can, because relationships, especially those built on fear, ask you to compromise, to adjust, to shrink, to smooth your edges. But solitude lets your edges grow back. It allows the truth of your being to take up the space it naturally occupies. And this is where freedom begins to feel less like rebellion and more like alignment, a returning, a remembering. You start moving in harmony with life not because you have forced yourself into discipline, but because you have stopped resisting your own nature. And here is the exquisite part. Once you begin to live in harmony with yourself, you also begin to attract those who live in harmony with themselves. It is as if life rearranges the stage. Certain characters exit softly, without drama. New characters appear at precisely the right moment. Not because you searched for them, but because you're being started broadcasting a different kind of signal, a frequency, that those who fear freedom simply cannot receive. But those who cherish freedom, those who have tasted their own awakening, recognize it immediately. How do you know such people when they enter your life? Well, there is a certain ease about them, a certain lightness. They do not cling. They do not demand explanations. They do not measure your worth by how closely you match their expectations. They have no interest in controlling your direction because they have learned the futility of controlling their own. They trust life, and therefore they can trust you not to behave a certain way, but to be yourself. You may notice that with these people, silence becomes comfortable. Conversation flows effortlessly. There is no competition, no performance, no subtle tug-of, or for emotional territory. You feel, in their presence, that you can expand without consequence, that your freedom is not a threat but an invitation. These are the companions who can truly walk beside you. But notice something else. You could not have met them earlier, when you were still shrinking to fit the demands of those who feared your freedom. You were simply vibrating at a different level of being. And the people you attracted were reflections of your own hesitation, your own doubt, your own mistrust of life. As you awaken, the landscape changes because you change. The people who remain are those who resonate with your expansion, not your contraction. Now let us return for a moment to the ones who could not walk with you. There is a tendency, especially in the early stages of awakening, to feel sorrow or guilt about this, to think, if only I had been more patient, or perhaps I should have tried harder. But understand, relationships built on fear cannot survive the presence of freedom. It is not because you failed. It is because freedom exposes everything inauthentic, everything borrowed, everything fragile and dependent. When you awaken, you stop participating in the subtle agreements that once held these relationships together, agreements such as, I won't grow if you won't grow, or I won't question your illusions if you don't question mine. These contracts dissolve the moment you begin to live honestly. And so, when someone falls away, it is not a tragedy. It is a natural pruning. The tree of your life is shedding the branches that no longer draw nourishment from the roots. This is how the tree survives. This is how it grows stronger. But growth, as nature shows us again and again, is never achieved by clinging. Still, let us look tenderly at those who fear your freedom. They are in many ways reflections of who you once were, anxious, uncertain, clinging desperately to an image of yourself constructed by the expectations of others. They are living inside a kind of spiritual childhood, believing the world is dangerous and that safety comes from control. And so, without judgment, you can let them go. You can allow them to live at the pace they are ready for. You do not need to drag them into the sky with you, for what use is freedom if it must be coerced? Not everyone is prepared to look into the terrifying brilliance of their own possibility, and that is perfectly all right. There is no need to convince, persuade, or awaken anyone. Your only task, if one can call it a task, is to remain authentic to the truth unfolding within you. Life will take care of the rest. It always does. In our next stretch together, we will explore something even more delicate. The way fear disguises itself as love, the subtle forms of dependency that masquerade as loyalty, and the profound realization that your freedom is the greatest gift you can offer the world, even if many resist it.